When a woman starts to lose you, the first thing that often shifts is the emotional connection. It doesn't usually begin with dramatic arguments or some final confrontation. More often it's subtle. She begins to pull away, not physically, not overtly, but emotionally. She's there, but she's not there. You can feel the change, even if she doesn't speak it. The warmth you used to feel in her eyes becomes guarded, like she's watching the interaction from a distance. She smiles maybe, but it doesn't reach her eyes, and you're left wondering what changed. It's not that she doesn't care. In fact, that's often the most confusing part. She still monitors you. She'll check your stories, like your posts, ask mutual friends about you, but the way she does it is quiet, indirect, veiled. It's as if she wants to be present without participating, like she's trying to stay close without being seen trying. And that speaks volumes. Because when someone truly doesn't care, they detach completely. They don't linger at the edges. But when someone is trying not to care, that's when they hover, silently, cautiously, just far enough away to protect their pride, but close enough to see what they might still be losing. And the problem is most men miss this, because we're not taught to recognize emotional withdrawal as an action. But it is. It's a move. It's a choice. When she stops engaging with you emotionally, when the conversations become shallow, when she no longer shares her thoughts like she used to, that's not random, that's not nothing. It's the beginning of her pulling away, whether consciously or not. She may not even realize she's doing it, but her actions will speak louder than anything she could say. And the man, if he still cares, is left in this confusing limbo, because nothing has been said outright. There's been no argument, no definitive moment to respond to, but he feels it. The silence between the words, the energy that used to fill the space now replaced by emotional distance. And if he confronts it too early, he risks being told he's overthinking. If he waits too long, he becomes the one who didn't respond in time. She may even justify this quiet monitoring as self-protection, as needing space, but deep down it's about control. It's about trying to process the emotional conflict within her without having to face the man directly. Because if she faced him directly, she'd have to be honest, not only with him, but with herself. She'd have to admit that she's letting go, that something meaningful might be slipping through her fingers, and that's not easy to own. So when you sense that change, when you feel the space between you growing even as the physical distance remains the same, don't ignore it. Pay attention. Because emotional absence is often the first echo of goodbye, whispered long before the final words are spoken. One of the clearest signs that a woman is beginning to emotionally check out is when she stops initiating. She's no longer texting first, no longer asking how your day was, no longer suggesting things to do together. She pulls back from that forward energy, from the effort that used to come naturally, because something inside her has shifted. And it's not always from anger or resentment. Sometimes it's more complex than that. Sometimes it's confusion, doubt, even disappointment. But whatever it is, it steals her initiative and it leaves you doing all the reaching. At first, you might think she's just busy. You might even convince yourself that you need to be more patient, more understanding. But over time, you notice that the pattern doesn't break. She becomes reactive instead of proactive. She responds to your messages but doesn't start conversations. She answers your calls but doesn't call you back. She accepts your plans but doesn't suggest her own. And it becomes clear, she's still there, but she's no longer reaching for you. This is the point where many men make a critical mistake. They chase harder. They start to compensate for her emotional distance by increasing their own effort. More texts, more calls, more reassurance. They think if they just show her how much they care, she'll come back. But that never works the way they hope it will, because what she's really doing isn't testing your affection, it's withdrawing hers. And if you chase a woman who is pulling away, you only widen the gap between you. But lack of initiation isn't just about communication. It's a reflection of her emotional state. It means that consciously or not, she's evaluating the connection, rethinking the dynamic, possibly even imagining a version of her life without you in it. That's a harsh reality to confront, but an important one. Because you can't afford to misread what silence truly means. It isn't always peace. Sometimes it's prelude. And here's the thing, when someone stops initiating, it's usually because they no longer feel compelled to. Love, real love, naturally moves us to connect. It makes us want to reach out, to share moments, to be seen. So when that urge fades, it's rarely by accident. It's not always final, but it is always meaningful. If she no longer feels drawn to you, something in the foundation has shifted. And ignoring it doesn't make it go away. What matters in that moment is what you do, not in terms of chasing, but in terms of observing. You need to recognize that her silence, her passivity is communicating something loud. And if you continue to engage from a place of fear of losing her, fear of being alone, you'll only deepen your own sense of powerlessness. The better path is clarity, to see the dynamic for what it is and to respect yourself enough to stop clinging to someone who's already let go. Because when initiation dies, connection follows close behind. Another subtle but powerful shift you'll notice when a woman starts to lose you is that her attention begins to scatter. She becomes distracted, less present, more absorbed in everything except the relationship. And it's not always loud or obvious. It can be as small as the way she listens, or rather doesn't listen, when you speak. You'll talk to her and feel like you're not quite being heard. Her responses are shorter, flatter, less emotionally engaged. She's there physically, but mentally, she's somewhere else. You see, emotional investment demands attention. When someone truly values a connection, they notice things. They remember the details, they follow up, they ask questions because they care about the answers. But when that investment starts to erode, their attention follows. Her phone becomes more interesting, conversations become transactional, and you begin to feel like you're competing not with other people necessarily, but with indifference. That emotional distance isn't always a deliberate rejection. Sometimes it's a coping mechanism. It's her way of bracing for the possibility that things might be ending. So she shifts her focus elsewhere. Work, friends, hobbies, even future plans that don't include you. Anything that lets her anchor herself in something other than the uncertainty of the relationship. And that's the part most men struggle to understand. It feels personal. It feels like rejection. But really it's a symptom of detachment. She's no longer as emotionally fused to the relationship as she once was, and instead of confronting that directly, she drifts. That drift is slow at first, almost invisible. You might excuse it, rationalize it, but eventually it becomes undeniable. You're not in her world the way you used to be. You're just orbiting around it, waiting to be invited back in. This is also where a lot of men slip into overcompensation. They try harder to entertain her, to reignite the spark, to bring her focus back onto them. But it rarely works because attention isn't something you can beg for or perform your way into. It has to come from genuine interest. It has to come from a place of emotional connection. And if she's losing that connection, the worst thing you can do is mask it with noise. The best thing you can do is pay attention yourself. Don't just look at what she's doing. Look at what she's no longer doing. That absence tells you everything. When her attention begins to shift, when you start to feel more like an afterthought than a priority, that's not just a phase. It's a sign that something fundamental is changing. And the sooner you recognize it, the better chance you have of responding with clarity instead of desperation. Because presence is not just about being in the same room. It's about being felt, being valued, being chosen again and again. When that stops happening, you need to ask yourself why you're still trying to hold on to someone who's already letting go. And another clear sign that a woman is starting to lose you is when she becomes increasingly short-tempered or easily irritated by things that once wouldn't have bothered her. And that change in temperament, subtle at first, is often misunderstood. It's easy to chalk it up to stress or to dismiss it as a bad day here or there, but when it becomes a pattern, you're not just witnessing moodiness, you're seeing emotional disconnection begin to surface as frustration. When someone is emotionally invested in a relationship, they tend to overlook the small flaws and inconveniences. They're more patient, more understanding, more willing to extend grace. That's what affection does. It softens judgment. But when that emotional investment starts to fade, what once seemed charming can start to feel irritating. The very things she used to find quirky or endearing might now come across as annoying or even intolerable. And the truth is, it's rarely about the specific behavior itself. It's about what that behavior now represents to her emotionally. disconnection, lack of excitement, growing resentment, or simply the realization that she no longer feels as bonded to you as she once did. That shortness in her tone, the way she cuts you off, the eye rolls, the sighs, the way she seems to be walking on edge, all of that is feedback, and it's not always coming from a place of anger. Often, it's coming from a place of internal conflict. Because what she's wrestling with internally is the growing gap between how she used to feel about you and how she feels now. That dissonance creates stress, and that stress needs an outlet, and unfortunately it usually lands on the person she's drifting away from. So what do most men do in this situation? They either retreat entirely or they try to fix the symptoms. They walk on eggshells hoping not to trigger another reaction, or they try to cheer her up without ever addressing the deeper emotional rift. But the reality is, her short temper isn't the problem, it's the symptom. And you don't treat symptoms by pretending they're not there, you treat them by understanding the root cause. And the root, in many cases, is the fading emotional connection. What's difficult to accept, but necessary, is that when she becomes irritated by everything, she's not necessarily trying to hurt you. In many ways, she's revealing that she's emotionally overwhelmed and unsure how to express it constructively. It's not just you she's losing patience with, it's the version of the relationship that no longer feels fulfilling to her. And unless that deeper disconnection is addressed, no amount of apologies, gifts, or sweet words will be enough to repair what's slipping away. So if you notice her getting frustrated more often, reacting sharply, or pulling away emotionally when conflict arises, it's not something to ignore, it's something to observe closely. Because irritation is often grief in disguise. It's the sound of love unraveling thread by thread, until one day it's completely gone. Another deeply telling sign that a woman is starting to lose you is when she no longer shows genuine interest in your thoughts, your passions, or even your day. And this might sound simple, maybe even insignificant on the surface, but it's actually one of the clearest indicators of emotional withdrawal. Because when someone truly cares, they stay curious about you. They want to know what you're thinking, what's exciting you, what's troubling you. It's not about small talk. It's about presence. It's about emotional intimacy. And when that fades, when she stops asking how your day went, when she no longer follows up on the things she once knew were important to you, you're not just dealing with distraction, you're witnessing detachment. And here's the thing, emotional investment doesn't always leave loudly. Sometimes it slips away quietly, camouflaged as busyness or preoccupation. You tell her about something meaningful that happened at work, and instead of engaging, she just nods and looks at her phone. You try to open up about something personal, and she changes the subject. That's not just inattentiveness, that's emotional drift. That's a heart that's starting to disconnect from yours. This withdrawal of interest is not a conscious act of rejection. Often it's not even deliberate. What's happening internally is that she's recalibrating her emotional energy. She's shifting it away from the relationship, often without realizing it. The mental space that used to be reserved for you, where she'd keep track of your needs, your dreams, your habits, that space begins to shrink, and in its place, indifference starts to grow. Now, some men make the mistake of responding to this shift with more effort. They become more available, more talkative, more eager to share, thinking that if they just communicate more, she'll come back into emotional alignment. But that rarely works, because the issue isn't a lack of information, it's a lack of emotional resonance. She hears your words, but they no longer move her. And that's the ache that's hardest to confront. Not that she's angry or distant, but that she no longer seems to care in the same way. And this is where a lot of confusion begins, because silence and disinterest aren't as dramatic as fights or betrayals, but they're often more damaging. They suggest a kind of quiet resignation, a pulling away not just from you, but from the connection itself. And unless it's addressed, that silence becomes the new normal. It becomes the space where emotional decay sets in. So when you notice that she no longer asks, no longer listens, no longer engages with who you are beyond the surface, that's not just a phase, that's not something to brush off. That's the sound of closeness unraveling one quiet moment at a time. And then there's the most subtle, but perhaps the most revealing sign of all. She stops fighting for the relationship. At first, it seems like a relief. There's no more tension, no more arguments, no more emotional storms. But that quiet can be deceptive. Because when a woman truly cares, when she's still emotionally invested, she'll argue, she'll challenge you, she'll express frustration. That kind of conflict, as difficult as it can be, is actually evidence that she still values the connection enough to resist its erosion. So when that energy disappears, when she becomes unnervingly calm, unbothered, or too agreeable, that's not peace, that's apathy. That's the beginning of emotional resignation. She no longer brings things up. She no longer pushes for change. She no longer reacts when you pull away. And that isn't a sign of maturity or stability. It's often a signal that she's already begun to emotionally check out. The fire that once fueled the connection has dimmed, not because everything's fine, but because she no longer sees the point in trying to fan the flame. You'll start to notice she lets things slide that used to matter to her. She stops asking for more time together. She doesn't express her needs anymore. She may still go through the motions, responding to texts, showing up when expected, but the emotional core is hollow. She's present in body, but not in spirit. And you can feel it. There's an absence that no words are spoken about, but it's deafening. And the most tragic part is how easy it is to ignore, because it doesn't look like rejection. It doesn't look like betrayal. It just looks like silence. And here's what you need to understand. That kind of silence is final. When she stops trying to make things work, when she no longer bothers to voice disappointment or request more from you, it's often because she's already made the decision internally. She's already mourning the relationship privately. She's already begun detaching in a way that most men don't realize until it's far too late. So if you find yourself in a situation where everything seems fine on the surface, no arguments, no demands, but deep down you sense the connection is withering, you're probably right. And the worst mistake you can make is interpreting that stillness as stability. Because often that stillness is the final stage before the end. It's the space between emotional exhaustion and complete departure. Recognize that silence for what it is, not a calm after the storm, but the eerie quiet before the collapse.